Hello there, welcome to Nighttime Stories. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Was it amazing or just okay? Drop a rating from 1 to 10 in the comments. Now it's time to unwind. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Before you get cozy, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe. It helps bring more bedtime stories your way. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin. I had been driving all night. The kind of shift where the city feels like a different place, quieter, darker, the streets stretching endlessly beneath flickering yellow streetlights. The rides were mostly the same, tired bartenders heading home, couples too drunk to drive, office workers staring dead-eyed at their phones, wishing they were anywhere but in my back seat. By 2:30 a.m., I was ready to be done. Then the last request popped up. No profile picture, no name, just Rider A. The pickup point was on the edge of downtown, near a strip of old buildings slated for demolition. I almost ignored it. The place was mostly abandoned now, businesses closing one by one, the city swallowing the land for new development. But the payout was good, too good. So I accepted. I pulled up to the curb. The street was empty. No bars, no lights, just rows of old storefronts with boarded-up windows. The kind of place you didn't hang around after dark. I checked the app. No messages. I waited. 3 minutes passed. Just as I was about to cancel, the back door opened. The man slid in quickly. I jumped a little. I hadn't even seen him approach. "Hey," I said, forcing a casual tone. "You Rider A?" No response. He was wearing a long black coat, the kind that swallowed his frame. His hands rested in his lap, long fingers too still. A black hat covered most of his face, shadow swallowing his features. Something felt off. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Where are you headed?" He didn't answer. Then finally, his voice low, almost mechanical. "Lincoln Street." Something in my stomach twisted. Lincoln Street was nowhere near here. It was on the other side of the city. An old neighborhood, mostly abandoned now. I had only driven through there once or twice, but I remembered it wasn't a place you went at night. "You sure?" I asked. "That's kind of far, almost outside the city limits." The man didn't move, didn't blink, just repeated flatly, "Lincoln Street." I should have canceled the ride. I should have told him to get out. But instead, I sighed and shifted into drive. The payout was good, too good. I took one last glance at him in the mirror. Something in my chest tightened. The streetlights flickered as we pulled away. The ride was quiet, too quiet. Most passengers fidget. They scroll through their phones, hum to the radio, adjust their seatbelts, something. But this guy, nothing. No movement, no sounds. Just stillness. The longer we drove, the heavier the air in the car became. I could feel it in my chest, thick and pressing, like the space had somehow shrunk without me noticing. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror. His head was slightly tilted downward, shadow covering most of his face. The brim of his hat was low, but I could just barely see his mouth. He wasn't smiling, wasn't frowning either. His expression was void, like a person caught between moments, like someone who had forgotten they were supposed to be alive. The streetlights passed in streaks of orange, flashing against the windshield, against his face. I cleared my throat. "So, been out late?" No answer. I gripped the wheel a little tighter. "Just visiting someone?" Nothing. "Work?" Silence. I exhaled sharply through my nose, shaking my head. All right, man, cool. Maybe he was just drunk, or high. Maybe he was mute, or maybe he just didn't want to talk. Fine by me. I turned up the radiolo, just enough to fill the void. Static. I frowned, glancing at the screen. The signal had died. Which didn't make sense. I knew this part of the city. There was no reason for the station to cut out. I tried switching channels. More static. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The man hadn't moved. Not once. Something cold crept down my spine. I faced forward again. Just drive. The buildings thinned as we moved into the older part of town, streetlights flickering weakly above the cracked pavement. Lincoln Street wasn't a place people went anymore. It used to be a nice neighborhood, decades ago, but time had taken it. Families moved out. The city forgot about it. Now, it was mostly boarded-up houses and empty lots. I had only been out here once before, and that was during the day. It was eerie even then. At night, it felt wrong. Like the air was thicker, like the houses were watching. The closer we got, the more uneasy I felt. My fingers tightened on the wheel. Almost there, I muttered, more to myself than him. The turn onto Lincoln Street was sharp, the road uneven under my tires. The houses were exactly how I remembered them dead. Broken windows, graffiti, a few streetlights struggling to stay alive. And then, his voice. Low, flat. Here. I blinked. We had barely entered the street. I slowed down. Which house? The man didn't move. Didn't gesture. Just said, here. I let the car roll to a stop. The house in front of us was the worst one on the block. Not just abandoned. Condemned. The front door was missing. A half-ripped police notice fluttered against the wood. The windows were shattered, their gaping holes like black, empty eyes. The entire place looked wrong, like it didn't want to be seen. I frowned. Are you sure? No answer. I turned to look at him, and my stomach dropped. The back seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. I hadn't heard anything. But he was gone. The seat belt was still buckled. I froze. A chill ran up my arms, my breath coming fast. I twisted around fully, shoving the seat forward. Nothing. No sign of him. I whipped my head back toward the house. The door was open now, swinging slightly in the breeze. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling. No service. The screen flickered. I swore under my breath. Something was wrong. So fucking wrong. I hit the lock button on my doors. Clunk. Then slowly I reached for the gear shift. A sharp bang rang out. I jumped. The sound had come from behind me. From the trunk. I sat there, frozen, my breath too loud. Bang. Again. From inside the car. Like something was inside my trunk, trying to get out. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. This isn't real. But it was. Another bang louder this time. I wasn't going to check. I wasn't that kind of person. I threw the car into drive and peeled out of there, tires screeching against the pavement. My hands were slick with sweat, my knuckles white on the wheel. The road twisted and turned, my headlights barely illuminating the broken pavement ahead. I didn't stop. Not until I hit the freeway. Not until I saw the familiar glow of the city ahead. Only then did I pull over. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely put the car in park. The silence inside the car felt too loud. I glanced at my phone. Full service now. Like nothing had ever happened. I let out a shaky breath. Get out. I turned off the engine and stepped into the cold night air, my breath coming fast, uneven. I walked to the back of the car, my hands trembling. Don't do this. But I had to. I gripped the trunk handle and pressed the release. The latch clicked. The trunk swung open. Empty. Nothing inside. Just my emergency kit, a spare tire. No sign of anything. I stood there, staring, my mind racing. I wasn't crazy. I heard it. I felt it. Something had been in there. Or something had left. I slammed the trunk shut, my heart still pounding. I needed to go home. I needed to forget this ever happened. But as I climbed back into the driver's seat, I noticed something. My ride history. The trip wasn't there. No record of Rider A. No pickup. No drop-off. Like the ride had never existed. Like he had never existed. My fingers trembled as I closed the app. Put the car in drive. And slowly, without looking back, I drove home. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers ached. The city lights came into view, warm, familiar, safe, but they didn't comfort me. Nothing did. I couldn't stop replaying what had happened. The ride, the empty back seat, the banging in the trunk. And the worst part? The ride was never booked. I pulled into my apartment's parking lot and cut the engine. My breath was uneven, my skin damp with sweat. I forced myself to stay seated, gripping the wheel until my pulse stopped thundering in my ears. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe I was just tired. I had been driving for hours. Could I have imagined it? Number. I heard the footsteps. I heard the door open. I felt him in the car. I swallowed hard, staring at my phone screen. The app was still open, the ride history sitting there empty. But then, a notification. One I hadn't seen before. A pending trip review. My stomach twisted. I tapped on it with shaky fingers. There was no passenger name, no location, just one option. Rate your ride with Rider A. The rating screen glowed at me, waiting. 5 empty stars. I stared at it, my body suddenly ice cold. This wasn't real. I pressed 1 star just to see what would happen. The screen flickered. Then a new message appeared. A text. From Rider A. Thank you for the ride. I nearly dropped the phone. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I had to be dreaming. Another message popped up. I enjoyed our time together. My stomach turned. A final message. Let's do it again soon. I threw the phone down. My breathing was shallow, chest tight with something I couldn't even name. Number no, no, no. I grabbed the device, my fingers shaking, and checked the number. Unknown. I opened the chat, history, nothing was there. The messages were gone. The review request was gone. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my face. I was tired. I needed sleep. That's all this was. I locked my car and made my way inside. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the back seat, the empty space where he had been. The dream came just before dawn. I was back in the car, driving. The city was gone. The streets stretched endlessly, lined with houses that had no windows, no doors, just dark, gaping holes. I gripped the wheel, trying to stop, but I couldn't. My hands wouldn't move. Then, a whisper from the back seat, soft, amused. "You pick me up." My breath hitched. I looked in the mirror. A man sat in the back seat, but it wasn't him. His face was blurred, flickering, like static on an old television. "I like this game," he said. I tried to wake up, tried to jerk myself out of it, but the dream held me there. The man leaned forward, his face shifting, morphing, trying to form something recognizable. "You'll pick me up again, won't you?" I woke up gasping. The next day, I deleted the app. I told myself that was enough. That if I just stopped driving, if I stopped picking people up, I would be safe. But I knew deep down that wasn't true. Because later that night, when I got back in my car to run errands, the seatbelt in the back was still buckled. I never picked up another passenger again. But sometimes, when I drive alone at night, I hear the seat creak. I hear breathing behind me. And when I glance in the rearview mirror, for just a second, I see a shape in the back seat, waiting. The first time I heard it, I assumed it was the wind. A soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap against the glass, barely audible over the hum of my ceiling fan. It wasn't unusual. My apartment was on the third floor of an old building, and sometimes the wind would rattle the windows just right, making strange sounds. I was half asleep, drifting in that hazy space between dreaming and waking, when I noticed it. Tap, tap, tap. Not loud, not frantic. Just patient. I turned over groggy, blinking at the red glow of my alarm clock. 2:47 a.m. Too tired to care. I pulled my blanket over my head, blocking out the noise, and let sleep take me again. The next morning, I barely remembered it. I only recalled the sound in flashes while making my coffee, like a forgotten detail from a dream. I rubbed at my temples, shaking off the feeling. It had been the wind. Nothing more. The week passed uneventfully. Work, gym, dinner, repeat. My life was uneventful, predictable. And then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. I woke up instantly this time. The sound wasn't aggressive, not demanding. It was deliberate, like someone was waiting. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, the room too quiet. I glanced toward the window, but the blinds were drawn, the soft glow of a street lamp barely filtering through the slats. I listened. Nothing. The room felt off. Not in a way I could explain, just that deep, instinctual feeling that something wasn't quite right. I reached for my phone, thumb hovering over the flashlight button. Then I hesitated. Do I really want to look? A stupid thought. There was nothing out there. I exhaled, shook my head, and forced myself to lie back down. I barely slept. By the third time, the sound had become routine. Like clockwork, once a week, always at the same time. 2:47 a.m. I tried to ignore it, but that only made it worse. Because once you notice something, once you realize it's happening at a pattern, You can't unnotice it. And suddenly, I was waiting for it. Lying in bed, holding my breath, watching the clock tick toward the inevitable moment. And like always, it came. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up slowly this time, expecting it. My pulse drummed in my ears. I turned toward the window. For the first time, I considered opening the blinds. But a new thought stopped me. What if I do, and there's something there? A chill ran down my spine. I swallowed hard, curling my fingers into the blanket, gripping it tight. You're being ridiculous. But my body wouldn't move. I sat there, frozen, waiting. Tap, tap, tap. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The next day, I told myself I was being paranoid. It was probably a bird. That made sense, didn't it? Some dumb pigeon landing on the windowsill, pecking at the glass. Except, there was no ledge, no balcony, nothing for something to stand on. I grabbed my coat and went outside, staring up at my apartment window from the parking lot. The building was old, brick. My unit was 3 stories up, facing the alley. The only thing near my window was a drain pipe running alongside the building. I felt something cold and awful settle in my stomach. It was stupid. It was just a sound. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed, my back to the window, body tense with anticipation. I knew it wouldn't come. It had only ever happened once a week, and tonight wasn't the night. But I still waited. I couldn't help it. I kept picturing it, the glass behind me, the blinds. Something just outside looking in. I told myself to stop, to let it go. I closed my eyes, counted my breaths. Then, tap, tap, tap. My blood ran cold. I wasn't supposed to hear it tonight, but it was there. Soft, patient, like it was testing me. A new game. I turned, slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. The blinds were still drawn, the window was closed. Nothing could get in. Nothing could reach up here. I inhaled sharply, fisted my hands in the sheets. And before I could stop myself, I whispered, "Hello?" Silence. The longest, deepest silence I had ever heard. Like the whole world had stopped. Then, a new sound. A soft, slow creak. The sound of a hand pressing against glass. Right on the other side. I shot up, grabbed my phone, thumb jamming against the flashlight button. I yanked up the blinds. The beam of light hit the window, and there was nothing. Just empty glass. No handprint, no shadow. No sign that anything had ever been there. But I knew. I knew. And this time, it wasn't leaving. The next morning, I checked the window. Nothing unusual, no scratches, no smudges. I tried to convince myself it had been in my head, that I had imagined the whole thing. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed proof. So that night, I set up my phone. Face down on my desk, camera tilted toward the window. If something was out there, I'd see it. If there was nothing, I'd sleep easier. I left it recording. And when 2:47 a.m. came, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. waiting. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't move, didn't speak. Just closed my eyes and let the sound crawl over me. Then, nothing. Silence. It was gone. I swallowed hard, finally allowing myself to relax. And as the minutes passed, I drifted into uneasy sleep, not knowing what I would find in the morning, not knowing that this time I had caught it. And when I pressed play on the video, it would be worse than I could have ever imagined. I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The weight of the night still clung to method tapping, the waiting, the silence. For a moment, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heart already beating too fast. Then I remembered. The recording. I sat up, reaching for my phone, fingers stiff from gripping the blanket too tightly in my sleep. The screen lit up with a soft glow, 6 hours of footage. I swallowed hard. This was it. Proof. My stomach churned as I hesitated. Do I really want to see what's on there? A stupid thought. Of course I do. I tapped play. The footage was boring at first. Just my room, bathed in soft darkness. The window sat still in the frame, the blinds down, the pale glow of the street lamp barely filtering through. I scrubbed through the first few hours. Nothing. Then, 2:47 a.m., my body tensed. The room on the screen remained still, no movement, no sounds. I frowned. The tapping had been clear as day to me last night. Had I imagined it? Then, just as I was about to fast forward, something moved. I almost dropped the phone. The blinds. They shifted. Not violently, not like the wind had caught them, but like something had brushed against them from the outside. A slow, subtle ripple across the fabric. A moment later, another movement. Lower this time, near the window latch. I leaned in, heart hammering. It was too dark to make out details, just a shadow shifting behind the thin blinds. Then, a shape. A hand. Long fingers barely visible through the gaps in the slats gripping the window frame. I dropped the phone. My pulse spiked, cold dread slicing through my chest. I hadn't imagined it. Someone had been there. Right outside my window. 3 stories up. I sat frozen, staring at the phone, my breathing shallow, my ears buzzed with panic. This wasn't just some random noise. This wasn't a branch against the glass. This was a person. But how? How had they gotten up there? I forced myself to pick up the phone again, my fingers cold and stiff. I scrubbed through the footage, my stomach twisting with every second. The hand disappeared after a few moments, but the blinds shifted again, like someone was adjusting their grip. Then nothing. For the rest of the night, the window remained still. No more tapping. No more movement. Whoever or whatever had been there hadn't left a trace. I spent the morning pacing my apartment, my thoughts racing. I needed answers. I grabbed my coat and headed outside, making my way around the building. My apartment faced the back alley. No fire escape, no balconies, just a sheer drop to the pavement below. I stood there, staring up at my window, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. There was no way someone had climbed up there. No ledges, no footholds. The drain pipe was there, sure, but it was old, rusted. It barely looked strong enough to hold a cat, let alone a full-grown person. So how had they done it? And why? The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I turned and hurried back inside. I needed to call someone. The police, maybe. But what would I even say? Hey, an invisible man is tapping on my window at 2:47 every night. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. Number. I needed something solid first. A clearer video. A face. Something real. That night, I set up the camera again. Only this time, I adjusted the angle. The lens pointed directly at the blinds. If something or some came back, I'd see it. I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind set me on edge. By the time 2:47 a.m. rolled around, I was already awake. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. Then, tap, tap, tap. My breath hitched. I gripped the blanket, my entire body tense. I didn't move. Didn't dare to. The tapping was softer tonight, almost careful. Like it knew I was listening. Then, a new sound. Something light shifting against the glass. I felt a prickling sensation crawl up my arms. Was it a hand? Fingertips brushing over the window. I swallowed hard, willing myself to stay still. I'll see it in the morning. I just had to wait. Minutes passed. The tapping faded. Then silence. I waited another hour before allowing myself to sleep. At sunrise, I grabbed my phone instantly. My fingers trembled as I pulled up the footage, scrolling straight to 2:47 a.m. The video loaded. At first, it was just my room. Still, silent. Then, the tapping. Soft. Rhythmic. A shadow shifted behind the blinds. I held my breath. A hand appeared. Fingers curled around the window frame. And this time, it didn't disappear right away. It just stayed there, holding on. My chest tightened. Then suddenly, the blinds moved, like someone was leaning closer, peering in. My stomach twisted as I waited for a face to appear. Waited to see what was out there. But there was nothing. Just hands, long fingers gripping the frame. Hanging there, 3 stories up. No body, no face, nothing holding them up. I slammed the phone down. My breath came in short, shaky bursts. My entire body buzzed with fear. That wasn't human. That wasn't possible. My mind raced, grasping for logic, for any explanation that made sense. But there wasn't one. I reached for my phone again, fingers trembling, and forced myself to play the rest of the video. The hands stayed there for 2 full minutes. Then, they simply let go. Just released. As if whatever was holding them up had simply floated away. I clenched my jaw. This had to be a prank. It had to be. Some kind of sick joke. But I knew. Tomorrow night, it would come back. And next time, I wasn't sure if it would just be hands at the window. Next time, it might want more. I didn't leave my apartment that day. I couldn't. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around my coffee cup, my phone lying in front of me, screen black. I hadn't rewatched the video. I couldn't. I already knew what I had seen. Hands. Just hands gripping the edge of my window frame. with nothing, no one holding them up. It had to be a trick. It had to be something explainable. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more my mind kept circling back to one impossible truth. It wasn't normal. And it was going to come back. By nightfall, I was exhausted. My brain felt fried, like I had spent the entire day running but never actually moving. I knew I should leave, stay with a friend, check into a motel, anything. But some sick part of me, some stubborn, stupid part, needed to see what would happen. So I set up my phone again. This time I positioned it differently, no more aiming at the blinds. Now it was directly in front of the window. If those hands came back, I'd get a clear shot. My heart pounded as I propped the phone against a stack of books, making sure the angle was perfect. The room felt wrong, too quiet, too still, like the air itself was waiting. I climbed into bed, my stomach twisted into knots. And then I waited. 2:47 a.m. The tapping started. Soft. Patient. I stared at the ceiling, frozen beneath the blankets. This time, I didn't turn, didn't move. I let it happen. Tap, tap, tap. A part of me wanted to rip the blinds open, to see it with my own eyes. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew if I looked, it would see me too. And I wasn't ready for that. So I stayed still, let it tap, and eventually it stopped. I barely slept after that. I just lay there, waiting for morning. As soon as sunlight hit my window, I bolted upright, heart hammering. I grabbed my phone. Shaking fingers, opened the video. Skipped ahead. The screen stayed still for the first few hours, the window, the faint glow of the streetlight outside. Then, at exactly 2:47 a.m., a shadow moved. I sucked in a breath, eyes locked on the screen. The hands came first, curling over the edge of the window frame, fingers pressing into the glass. Then, slowly, they pulled up. I stopped breathing. The hands didn't just grip the window this time. They were trying to lift something up, something too heavy. The fingers strained, pressed harder. Then, a shape, a head, rising slowly. I felt actual nausea as I watched. The head came higher, inch by inch, as if something was dragging itself up from nothing. The features were wrong. I couldn't make them out, couldn't tell if it was a man, a woman, or something else entirely. The only thing I knew for sure, it was looking into my apartment. I slammed my phone down on the table, gasping for air. My hands were shaking. I couldn't do this. I couldn't. I grabbed my keys. I had to get out. I ended up in my car, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I should call someone, the police maybe, but what would I even say? Hey, an invisible person is climbing my window every night. I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head. There had to be an explanation. Something rational. But there wasn't. And I knew, deep in my gut, this wasn't going to stop. Not on its own. I pulled out my phone again, my hands still trembling, and clicked the video once more. I forced myself to watch. Forced myself to see. The hands, the head, the thing pulling itself up. But it never fully climbed through. It just held there. Watching. Waiting. And then, after exactly 3 minutes, it let go. Just released. Like it had never been there at all. I sat there, phone clutched in my hands, pulse thudding. I knew what I had to do. I had to stay awake. I had to see it with my own eyes. Because tonight I wasn't just going to record it. I was going to catch it. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I bought an extra camera, better one, with night vision. I set it up outside my apartment window, rigging it on a makeshift stand. If something climbed up tonight, I'd see exactly what it was. Inside, I positioned my phone in its usual spot, aimed at the blinds. And then I waited. The apartment was too quiet. I kept glancing toward the window, my stomach twisting. I felt like I had invited something in. Like by acknowledging it, I had made it real. But it was real. And tonight, I was going to prove it. 2:47 a.m. The first tap came instantly, like it knew I was waiting. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I forced myself to stay still. Tap, tap, tap. My pulse was so loud I could barely hear it. I gripped the phone under my blanket, thumb hovering over the screen. I could check the outside camera, see it from the other side. But I was scared. Scared that the moment I looked, I'd see too much. But I had to know. I swallowed hard and clicked the live feed. The screen flickered. Then, nothing. Just the window. The building's exterior. The empty wall leading down to the alley. No ledge, no fire escape. Nothing for someone to stand on. And yet, the tapping continued. I switched back to my room's camera. The hands were already there, gripping the frame. But this time, they were inside. My heart stopped. The fingers curled around the window from the inside of my apartment. I dropped the phone. Something shifted behind me. I felt it before I heard it. A presence. Something just beyond my vision, just past the edge of my bed. Then, a new sound. Not tapping. Not scratching. Something closer. The soft sound of my bedroom door unlocking. The sound of the lock turning sent a bolt of raw panic through me. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body had frozen completely, my breath stuck in my throat, my limbs locked in place beneath the blankets. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining it. Something was inside my apartment. For a split second, I convinced myself I had misheard. That it was the neighbors, that the old pipes had shifted, that I had left the door unlocked, and it was just settling. Then the handle creaked. Slowly, deliberately, I felt my stomach drop. I wasn't alone. The camera. My phone was still in my hand, the live feed still playing, the screen casting a dim glow across my blanket. I forced my fingers to move, my body trembling as I lifted the phone toward my face. The window was empty now. The hands were gone. But the door was opening. In the grainy black and white night vision feed, the knob twisted and the door slowly swung outward. A figure stood just outside my bedroom. Tall, thin. It didn't move at first, just stood there, watching. I couldn't see a face, only a shape. A void where a person should have been. Then, a step. I snapped. I threw myself out of bed, phone forgotten. heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The second my feet hit the floor, the thing moved. Not rushed, not panicked, but like it had been waiting, like it had wanted me to react. I bolted for the door. No thinking, no hesitation, just pure survival. I shoved past the thing in the doorway and felt it. Not solid, not soft, something else. A shape that didn't belong, a presence that wasn't human. I didn't stop to look. I didn't even scream. I just ran. Through the darkened apartment, past the kitchen, my hand fumbled for the front door lock. I yanked it open and stumbled into the hallway, gasping. For one horrible second, I thought it would follow me, that I would turn and see it right behind me. But when I turned, the door was still wide open, and the apartment was empty. I stood there, shaking, my breath coming in ragged bursts. The hallway was silent, too silent, like everything was waiting. Then, slowly, the bedroom door, the one I had run from, swung shut, on its own. Click. I ran. I don't remember driving. I don't remember grabbing my keys, shoving my feet into my sneakers, or sprinting down the apartment stairs like my life depended on it. All I remember is the next moment standing in my car, engine running, hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I stared straight ahead, refusing to look back. My body was on fire with adrenaline, my mind screaming at me to move, to drive. I didn't stop until I was parked outside a gas station on the other side of the city. The lights were bright. There were people inside. I could see them through the windows. Real people. Normal. Safe. I gripped my phone with numb fingers. The screen was still on, the video feed still open. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I turned it back toward me. Paused the video. Rewound. My breath hitched as I watched it again. The hands on the window. The fingers curling, pressing into the glass. The door unlocking on its own. And then, the moment I had shoved past it, the thing in my doorway. The moment I ran, it had turned too. But not toward me. It had turned toward the camera. Toward the phone. Toward the thing recording it. And in the split second before the bedroom door had closed, it had reached out. Reached toward the phone. And just before the screen went dark, I saw my own face staring back. Not from the phone. Not from the reflection in the window. From behind the door. From inside my own bedroom. I dropped the phone. I never went back. I called my landlord the next morning, told them I was breaking my lease. I didn't care how much it cost. I didn't care about my stuff. I never went back for it. The only thing I took from that apartment was my phone. And the video. The proof. I wanted to delete it. I should have deleted it, but I couldn't. I moved cities, got a new job, a new apartment in a high-rise with no windows facing the outside walls. For a while, things were normal again. But then, the messages started. Unknown number. No text, no name. Just a file. An attachment. Every week, always at 2:47 a.m. The same video, my apartment, my window, the hands, the door opening. And then, in the last second, before the screen goes dark, that face, that version of me, still trapped inside that room, still waiting, and every week the same message. Let me out. I didn't believe the stories about the house at first. I'd heard them all growing up, the usual urban legend nonsense passed down by kids desperate for something exciting in a town that had nothing going on. They said people went missing there decades ago, that the owners never really left, even after they died, that if you stayed inside long enough, you'd start to hear whispers, and they wouldn't be yours. But it was just a house, just a place, left behind and forgotten like a rotting memory. At least, that's what I thought. Before we went inside, it was my idea. I won't pretend otherwise. I was the one who said, let's go check it out. The four of Usme, Alex, Nate, and Jeshid spent the summer trying to find something, anything to do, before we all went our separate ways after graduation. The house had come up in conversation more than once. Dude, no one's lived there in like 50 years, Nate had said when I first mentioned it. Jess had scoffed, rolling her eyes. And what exactly do you think we'll find? Ghosts? I shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. But aren't you at least a little curious? Alex, always the quiet one, the cautious one, had frowned. I don't know, man. That place gives me a bad feeling. It was the way he said it that stuck with me. Not like he was scared of getting caught trespassing. Like he was genuinely uneasy. That should have been the first sign. But I didn't listen. None of us did. The house sat on the edge of town, just past a stretch of dead-end roads and empty farmland. No one ever went near it, not anymore. Not since the Grayson family disappeared. That was the backstory, the part that made it more than just a creepy old building. In 1971, the entire family vanished overnight. Mr. and Mrs. Grayson, their 2 kids gone without a trace. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just an empty house, fully furnished, like they had meant to come back but never did. People had theories, of course. A murder-suicide, the parents snapping under some unseen pressure. A failed escape from town, running from something only they knew about. Or, if you asked the kids at school, something worse. Something still inside the house. Waiting. We arrived just after sunset. I don't know why we chose to go at night. Maybe we thought it would make it more exciting. Or maybe none of us wanted to admit how unnerved we felt. The house was exactly as I expected. 2 stories, steep-roofed, the kind of Victorian build that might have been beautiful once. But time had done its work. The paint had peeled away, the windows were either shattered or coated in grime, and the front door hung slightly ajar like someone had left in a hurry. Like it was waiting for someone to come inside. Jess was the first to break the silence. So, are we doing this or not? Nate grinned, the kind of grin people wear when they're trying to hide nerves. Ladies first. Jess didn't hesitate. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. And just like that, we followed. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not dust, not mildew, something else. Something rotting. I swallowed the urge to gag as we stepped into what had once been the main hall. The house had been left almost completely untouched. Furniture still sat in place, draped with sheets gone yellow with time. A grand staircase curved up to the 2nd floor, the wooden banister warped with age. Faint outlines of family photos clung to the walls, their frames missing, like someone had tried to erase them. Like they had been taken down, deliberately. I could hear Nate breathing beside me. Shallow, uneasy. Jess, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed. She moved ahead of us, running a hand along the dust-covered banister. "What do you think happened here?" she asked. Alex answered from behind me. "They left." His voice was quiet. Too quiet. I turned to look at him. His expression was wrong. Like he wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. Like he was afraid. I was about to ask him what was wrong when... bang! The noise came from upstairs. A sharp, heavy thud that made my pulse jump to my throat. All of us froze. Jess turned slowly, her confidence slipping. "That was just the house settling, right?" Alex didn't answer. I forced out a laugh. Too forced, too tight. "Yeah, old houses make noise." But I didn't believe it. And I don't think any of us did. Nate exhaled sharply. "Okay, cool. We heard a noise. We checked the house. Let's get out of here." Jess scoffed. "Are you serious?" He gave her a look. "We don't know if we're alone in here." She rolled her eyes. "No one's lived here for 50 years. If someone's upstairs, it's probably just a squatter." Alex was still staring up the staircase, not blinking, like he was listening for something. Then, softly, "We're not alone." His voice sent a chill through me. Jess laughed, but it was forced. "Oh, come on, don't..." Footsteps. From the second floor. Slow, deliberate. One. Then another. Then another. Coming toward the stairs. Coming toward us. No one moved. No one spoke. We just stood there, rooted to the spot. And then, the faintest whisper. Not from above. From behind us. "You shouldn't have come." I spun around so fast I almost tripped. The doorway was empty. Nothing but the night beyond. The room felt wrong now. Heavier. Like we had stepped into something that didn't want us there. My hands were cold. And for the first time since we arrived, I felt it. A presence. Watching. Waiting. Knowing. Jess spoke first. "I think we should go." For once, no one argued. I turned toward the front door, heart pounding. We needed to leave. Now. But before we could take a single step, the door slammed shut. The door slammed shut with a force that sent dust spilling from the ceiling. The sound echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls like a gunshot. Jess spun on her heel, her bravado gone. What the hell? She rushed to the door, yanking on the handle. It didn't budge. I swallowed the knot in my throat and moved toward her. Maybe the wood's warped. Let me try. I wrapped my hands around the doorknob, twisting, pulling. It felt solid, like something had locked it in place from the other side. Nate was pacing behind us, running a hand through his hair. "All right, not funny. Which one of you set this up?" Alex stood frozen in place, staring at the staircase. His face was pale, mouth slightly open, like he wasn't really hearing us. Jess huffed and banged on the door. "If this is a prank, it's not funny. You got your scare, let's go." No answer. The house settled around us, an eerie silence stretching between the walls. I turned uneasy. No one locked it. You saw us walk in. The door was already open. Nate let out a sharp breath. "Then why won't it open now?" Before I could answer, something moved at the top of the stairs. A slow shift in the shadows. A shape, barely visible in the dim light. Alex's voice came out barely above a whisper. "There's someone up there." The rest of us froze. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I followed his gaze. The second floor was dark, but something was there. Not standing, not moving in the way a person would. It was just a sliver of darkness that hadn't been there before. Jess let out a nervous laugh. "I bet it's a raccoon or something," but she didn't sound convinced. Nate took a hesitant step back. "I don't think raccoons whisper." The thing in the darkness shifted again, And suddenly I felt it, the undeniable, stomach-twisting certainty that we were being watched. Alex exhaled slowly. "We need to leave." I nodded, stepping away from the door. "We'll find another way out." Jess let out a frustrated sigh, but she didn't argue. I moved toward the nearest window, brushing away the dust and grime with my sleeve. Outside, the world looked the same, quiet, empty, like the house hadn't stirred in years. I reached for the frame, fingers wrapping around the wood. It was stuck. I pushed harder, but it wouldn't budge. Jess moved to another window, struggling with it as well. "You have got to be kidding me." Nate cursed under his breath. "How the hell are all the windows stuck shut?" Alex finally tore his gaze away from the stairs. His voice was lower than before. "It's not the house keeping us in." A heavy silence followed his words. I didn't want to ask, but I did anyway. "Then what is?" He licked his lips, eyes darting back up the stairs. "I don't know, but I think it wants us to go up there." Jess scoffed, throwing her hands in the air. "Absolutely not. I don't care if there's a whole vault of treasure up there. I'm not playing into some creepy horror movie setup." But even as she spoke, none of us moved toward the door again. A slow chill ran down my spine as a realization settled in. It wasn't just that the house had trapped us, it was guiding us. Alex took a deep breath, his shoulders tense. "We have two choices: stay down here and wait for something to happen, or go up and see what it wants." Jess glared at him. "There's a third option. We break a window and get the hell out of here." I wanted to believe it would work, but I already knew the answer. "It won't let us." Nate let out a short, humorless laugh. "Listen to us. It won't let us. Do you hear how insane that sounds?" Alex turned to him, his expression unreadable. "Then open the door." Nate hesitated. He didn't try the door again. Instead, we all found ourselves looking up. Something waited on the second floor, and somehow we knew that ignoring it wasn't an option. I squared my shoulders. "Fine, we go up, but we stay together." Jess swore under her breath, but followed as I started toward the stairs. Each step groaned under our weight, the wood old and brittle, but the house held firm. The air grew heavier, thick with something I couldn't name. Halfway up, the temperature dropped. Not a gradual change, an immediate, sharp shift that sent a shudder through my limbs. Jess muttered, "This place is cursed." At the top of the stairs, a hallway stretched before us, lined with doorways leading into shadowed rooms. The sense of being watched had grown unbearable. My skin prickled, my every instinct screaming to turn back. Alex stopped at the first door, his fingers hovering over the handle. "This one." I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't want to know. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a room frozen in time. A child's bedroom. The furniture was coated in dust, but everything was intact: small bed, wooden dresser, a collection of toys scattered across the floor. A music box sat on the nightstand, its lid slightly open. Nate let out a slow breath. "This is unsettling." Jess stepped inside, crossing her arms. "So what now? We look for ghostly footprints." Alex wasn't listening. He moved toward the nightstand, reaching for the music box. I started to tell him not to, but it was too late. He lifted the lid. A soft melody filled the air, delicate and slow. Then something clicked. The closet door across the room slid open, inch by inch. I took a step back. The inside of the closet was pitch black, no light, no reflection, a void of absolute darkness. And in that darkness, a shape shifted. A pair of small, pale hands emerged from the shadows. Fingers curled against the wood, gripping the frame. Then the hands pulled, and something started crawling out. Jess screamed. I grabbed Alex, shoving him toward the door. "Run!" We didn't look back. Didn't stop. The thing in the closet was moving, dragging itself across the floor with slow, deliberate movements. We bolted down the stairs, our footsteps frantic. The second we reached the front door, It swung open on its own. No hesitation, no second thoughts. We ran. By the time we reached the road, lungs burning, legs aching, the house stood silent behind us. The door had closed again, like it had never been open at all. Jess gasped for breath. We're never speaking about this again. Alex didn't say anything. He was still holding the music box. I hadn't seen him take it, but now that he had, I knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. No one spoke on the way back to town. Alex sat in the passenger seat, his fingers curled tightly around the music box like he wasn't even aware he was holding it. Jess sat in the back beside Nate, arms crossed, legs bouncing. Every so often she'd shoot Alex a look, then glance away like she wanted to say something but thought better of it. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The road stretched out ahead, empty, silent except for the hum of the engine. The further we got from the house, the heavier the tension in the car became. It should have been the opposite. We should have been relieved. But none of us were. Because we had left the house. But something had left with us. The music box, and whatever had crawled out of that closet, it wasn't finished with us yet. Jess was the first to break. Throw it out. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. Alex didn't react at first. He just kept staring straight ahead, his grip tightening. Jess shoved forward, reaching over Nate to grab at it. Seriously, Alex, throw it out of the window. We are not keeping that thing. Alex jerked away from her, his voice low. I'm not getting rid of it. Jess blinked. Excuse me? He finally turned to look at her, and for the first time, I noticed how pale he was. His skin had taken on a waxy, almost translucent quality, and his eyes were darker than usual. Not tired, not exhausted, shadowed. Nate leaned back in his seat. Dude, she's right. You didn't mean to take it, right? Just toss it. Alex ran a thumb over the wooden lid, his expression unreadable. I don't think I can. I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the wheel tighter. Why not? He hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, it won't let me. A cold, sinking feeling settled in my gut. Jess groaned, throwing herself back into the seat. Okay, nope. Number, we are not doing this haunted object thing. We are not bringing some cursed antique into town. She was right. We all knew she was right. But the way Alex sat there, unmoving, made my skin crawl. I wasn't sure if he was refusing to let go of the music box, or if it was refusing to let go of him. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the air in the car felt suffocating. Jess was the first one out. She slammed the door, pacing across the yard, arms wrapped around herself. Nate got out next, rubbing a hand down his face. I need a drink, a strong one. Alex was the last to move. He stepped out slowly, the music box still clutched in his hands. He stared down at it, jaw clenched like he was fighting against something none of us could see. I stood by the car, my pulse drumming in my ears. Come inside. We'll figure this out. Jess shook her head. Nope. Number, I'm out. I want nothing to do with this. Nate hesitated, looking between Alex and me. I don't know, man. This whole thing feels wrong. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. I know, but we can't just leave him. Alex finally spoke. It's fine. I just need to sit down. He sounded strange, like someone had hollowed out his voice. Jess rolled her eyes but followed us inside. Fine, but if something weird happens, I'm calling an exorcist or something. Nate snorted. You know one? Number, but I'll find one. Inside, I sat up in the living room while Alex sat on the couch, the music box balanced on his knees. He hadn't opened it again since the house. Jess stayed by the window, arms still crossed. What's the plan exactly? Nate flopped into a chair. We burn it. Alex flinched. It was small, barely noticeable, but I saw it. I cleared my throat. Maybe we should figure out what it is first. Jess scoffed. It's a creepy little music box from a creepy little house where people disappeared. There's nothing to figure out." Alex finally looked up. His expression was strange, half lost, half focused. "I don't think it's just a music box." None of us spoke. Then, without another word, he reached forward and opened it. The melody spilled into the room, slow and mechanical, like something winding down. And then, the lights flickered. Nate sat up straighter. "Nope, nope, shut it right now." Jess backed away from the window. "I told you not to open it." But Alex wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the inside of the box, his breathing slow, measured. I leaned forward. "Alex." He blinked, shaking his head like he was trying to clear it. I think it's a way in." A chill ran down my spine. A way into what? Alex lifted his gaze to mine. His pupils were too wide, swallowing almost all the color in his eyes. A way in for them. The lights flickered again. The temperature in the room dropped. And then, a creaking sound. Not from the house. Not from the music box. From the closet in the hallway. Nate muttered, "I thought I shut that." Jess took a step back. "You did." The door inched open. A sliver of blackness peeked through the crack. And then, the hand. Pale, skeletal fingers curled around the edge of the door frame. Something shifted in the shadows, pressing against the doorway, stretching, moving. Jess screamed. The lights cut out completely. I scrambled backward, my pulse a thunderous roar in my ears. Alex sat perfectly still, eyes locked on the hallway. The music box kept playing, the melody warping, twisting, slowing. The closet door swung fully open. Something stepped out. I couldn't see its face, but I knew. It had followed us from the house. And now, it wasn't leaving. The thing in the hallway didn't move at first. It just stood there, pressed against the frame of the open closet, half hidden in the shadows. The only thing I could see clearly were the fingers long, pale, curled around the edge of the door. Then, slowly, they pulled away, and the door started to close. Not all at once. Not like something retreating. More like something was watching us, testing how much it could show itself before we ran. My pulse hammered in my ears. I didn't want to look at the others. I was afraid of what I might see on their faces. The music box was still playing. Alex sat frozen, eyes locked on the hallway. His fingers twitched, like he was fighting the urge to open the box further. "Close it," I whispered. He didn't move. Jess grabbed his wrist, yanking the music box from his lap. "I swear to God, Alex." The melody cut off. Everything stopped. The room went so silent my ears rang from the absence of sound. The air felt heavier, like we were being watched from every angle. Then Nate took a step toward the hallway. "Wait," I said quickly. He hesitated. His voice was low. "The door." I forced myself to look. The closet door had shut completely. The hallway was empty. Whatever had been there, it was gone. At least for now. We didn't waste time. Jess shoved the music box into a pillowcase, wrapping it up like it was something toxic. "We need to get rid of it." I nodded, moving to grab my keys. "We'll burn it." Alex flinched. Jess noticed. "You're not going to argue about that, are you?" Alex looked down at his hands. I don't think burning it will do anything." Nate ran a hand over his face. "Okay, then what? We keep it? Bring it to some psychic? Drop it in the ocean?" Alex hesitated before answering. "We bring it back." Silence. I stared at him. Back where? He finally looked at me. His face was paler than before, his eyes unfocused like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. "The house," he said. And somehow, I knew he was right. We drove in silence. It was just past midnight when we pulled back up to the old house. The windows were dark, the structure looming against the trees like it had been waiting for us to return. None of us wanted to go inside. Jess was the first to say it. "What if the door locks again?" Nate exhaled sharply. "Then we run. We're not staying this time." Alex didn't say anything. He was holding the wrapped-up music box like a weight in his lap, his fingers gripping the cloth too tightly. We stepped out of the car. The air was thick with humidity. The smell of damp wood and decay pressed against my nose as we moved toward the front door. Alex walked ahead of us. He didn't hesitate when he reached the entrance, just pushed it open and stepped inside. I exchanged a glance with Jess and Nate before following. The house felt different now. Not colder. Not louder. Just wrong. Like something had been disturbed. Like the walls knew we had taken something from them. We moved to the staircase. Back up to the second floor. Back to the room with the closet. My chest tightened as we stepped inside. Everything was as we had left it. The bed, the dresser, the dust-covered floor. But the closet door was open again. Wider than before. Alex stepped forward. Without a word, he placed the music box inside. And then, slowly, he shut the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air shifted. The heaviness lifted, like a weight being removed from our chests. The smell of rot lessened. The silence, once deafening, settled into something more natural. The house didn't feel alive anymore. It felt empty. Jess let out a long, shaky breath. "Is that it?" Alex's shoulders sagged. "I think so." Nate turned, already moving toward the exit. "Good, then let's get out of here." This time, the door didn't close behind us. It stayed open, yawning into the night. But I didn't look back. None of us did. We just walked out, without running, without speaking. And when we reached the car, the house stood silent and still, waiting for time to finish swallowing it whole. We never talked about it again. Not the house. Not the music box. Not the thing in the closet. We went our separate ways after that summer. Jess moved out of town. Nate enlisted. Alex changed. I tried to stay in touch, but he grew distant. I saw him once, years later. We didn't talk much. But I'll never forget what he said before we parted ways. "It's still there, you know." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. I just nodded and walked away. And I never looked back.
There were 5 of us. 5 friends who had once been inseparable, but over the years had drifted apart, each of us pulled in different directions by work, relationships, or just life in general. The plan seemed simple enough. A weekend camping trip in an isolated forest, far from everything, no phones, no distractions, just the fire, the stars, and the hope of reconnecting. It was Ethan who brought it up first. Ethan, the one who used to be the glue that held us all together. He'd been the one to organize our little gatherings in the past, even when it seemed like no one else could be bothered. This time, though, it was different. His message in the group chat was casual, almost nostalgic. "How about we do something crazy? Go camping. We all need a break." At first it seemed like a bad idea, but then we all agreed. The thought of getting away from the noise of daily life was appealing, even if the idea of spending a weekend in the middle of nowhere made me uneasy. There was Jamie, always the practical one, the one who kept track of everyone's schedules and made sure things got done. She had been Ethan's best friend since childhood, and even though they'd grown apart over the years, I could tell that he still held a special place in her life. When she agreed to the trip, I figured it was because she needed a break just as much as the rest of us. Her job had been stressing her out, and her recent breakup hadn't helped. She seemed eager to get away from everything. Then there was Tom. He was the jokester, the one who could lighten any mood. Tom always had something sarcastic to say, always made everyone laugh. I used to love how he could always crack a joke even in the most awkward situations. But lately, I noticed that even his jokes seemed hollow, like he was trying too hard to keep the group's energy up. He had just started a new job, and I could tell he was struggling. He didn't say much about it, but the trip seemed like his way of trying to reset. Sarah was the quiet one. She never said much, but she always noticed everything. She was the observer of the group, the one who seemed to see things we didn't. I'd always admired her sensitivity, but I could never tell if it was a gift or a curse. She hadn't been in touch much over the past few months, but I was glad to hear that she was coming along. I guess we all had our reasons for wanting to leave the world behind, even if none of us spoke them aloud. And then there was Ryan. Ryan was the one who never really fit in, the one who always seemed off. He wasn't the type to open up, even though we had known him for years. There was always something about him, something cold and detached. He'd been part of our group since high school, but even then, I could never put my finger on what it was about him that made me uneasy. He was quiet, so quiet that sometimes I forgot he was even there. And yet, every now and then, when he did speak, it felt like he was saying something just a little too strange, too calculated. When he said he was coming along, I was surprised, but I didn't think much of it. After all, it had been years since we all hung out together. Maybe this was his way of reconnecting. I should have paid more attention to that feeling, the one I'd always had, the nagging feeling that something was off about Ryan. But at the time, it didn't seem important. And so, we went. The forest was more isolated than I had imagined. Ethan drove us out there in his old rusted truck, winding down narrow gravel roads that seemed to vanish into the trees. The further we went, the more I began to feel a creeping sense of isolation. I could see it in Sarah's face, too. She stared out the window, her eyes wide, but she didn't say anything. Jamie, of course, was in charge of everything. She pulled out maps, made sure we had enough supplies, and started organizing the campsite with military precision. She always had a way of taking control, and I couldn't help but feel a little relieved that she was here. It was easy to let her do the heavy lifting while I watched. Tom, on the other hand, was goofing around, trying to get everyone to play a ridiculous game of charades while we set up the tents. His voice echoed through the trees, breaking the silence in a way that made me shiver slightly. It was as if the forest didn't like being disturbed. Ryan was just, there. He hadn't said much since we arrived. He barely even glanced at the campsite. He was standing a few yards away, leaning against a tree, looking off into the distance. He had a strange intensity about him, something that made me wonder if he was really present or if his mind was somewhere else entirely. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was being paranoid. Ryan had always been like this, quiet, distant. Maybe that was just who he was. But I couldn't ignore the prickling on the back of my neck. Something was wrong. By the time night fell, the forest felt even more suffocating. We had gathered around the campfire, its flickering light casting strange shadows on our faces. The air was still, thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. Jamie had started talking about her job, venting about the stress and the pressure she'd been under. I could tell she was trying to let it all out, to feel like herself again. Tom was laughing and throwing in jokes, trying to keep the mood light. But for some reason, I couldn't fully engage. I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. Ryan hadn't said a word all evening. He just stared at the fire, his face illuminated by the orange glow. Every now and then, he would shift his gaze to one of us, but it wasn't the kind of look that felt reassuring. It was more like he was analyzing us, studying us. "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice quieter than usual. "There's something strange about this place. It feels like we're being watched." Her words sent a ripple through the group, and I could see the unease in everyone's eyes. Even Tom stopped laughing for a moment. "Don't be ridiculous," Ethan said, trying to brush it off. "We're just here to relax. There's nothing out here but trees." But Sarah's words had struck a chord with me. I'd been thinking the same thing. Ryan turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto Sarah. His eyes didn't have the warmth I remembered from our childhood. They were cold, calculating. I couldn't explain it, but in that moment I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You're right," Ryan said softly. "We're being watched." As the fire crackled, a sudden gust of wind swept through the camp, sending a few of the logs tumbling. We all jumped, but it wasn't just the wind that startled me. For a brief moment, just as the flames flickered out, I could have sworn I saw a figure in the distance, standing just beyond the tree line. It was too far away to make out clearly, but it was tall and seemed to move unnaturally, as though it wasn't quite right. I blinked, and it was gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "What?" Jamie asked, looking up from her phone, which she'd finally pulled out to check the time. "I thought I saw someone in the trees," I replied, my voice low. "Probably just an animal," she said, dismissing it with a laugh, but there was an edge to her voice. I could tell she didn't like the way the atmosphere had shifted either. Tom looked over at Ryan. "What about you, man? See anything?" Ryan didn't answer. He just stared into the darkness, his expression unreadable. "I think we should go to bed," Sarah said suddenly, breaking the silence. Jamie nodded, standing up. "Yeah, good idea. We'll get an early start tomorrow." Ryan stood too, though he didn't seem eager to leave the fire's warmth. "Do you think it'll come for us?" he asked, his voice soft and strange. "Come for us?" Tom echoed, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "What are you talking about, man?" Ryan didn't answer. He just kept staring at the darkness. As I lay in my tent that night, the sound of the wind outside was the only thing that kept me from spiraling into full-blown panic. But even that sound was different, distant, almost hollow, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I kept thinking about Ryan. Something was wrong with him. It wasn't just the way he had acted tonight. It was the way he had been acting for months now, whenever we all got together. He didn't seem like the same person I once knew. I heard something move outside the tent, just a rustle of leaves. I held my breath, waiting, but it was probably just an animal. Still, my heart pounded in my chest, and sleep refused to come. The next morning, the tension hadn't lifted. If anything, it was worse. Jamie tried to keep things moving, suggesting a hike to get everyone's mind off the unease, but I could tell no one was fully into it. Tom tried to joke his way through the hike, but his jokes seemed forced now. Even Sarah was quiet, her eyes darting around as if expecting something to leap out from behind the trees. Ryan, of course, was quiet again. More than usual. He barely spoke at all as we hiked deeper into the forest. The air felt thick, like something was watching us from the trees, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all just waiting for something. I don't know why I decided to wander off. Maybe it was the silence getting to me, or maybe it was just the need to escape the group. But I stepped off the trail, just for a minute, to take a breath away from the others. That's when I found it. Buried beneath some leaves was an old tattered journal. It was leather-bound, and the pages inside were yellowed with age. I picked it up, dusted it off, and opened the first page. It was written in a careful, precise hand, the words almost too neat to be real, but the deeper I read, the more the words began to twist into something darker. It was filled with descriptions, observations, about us. We had gathered around the campfire, its flickering light casting strange shadows on our faces. The air was still, thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. Jamie had started talking about her job, venting about the stress and the pressure she'd been under. I could tell she was trying to let it all out, to feel like herself again. Tom was laughing and throwing in jokes, trying to keep the mood light. But for some reason, I couldn't fully engage. I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. Ryan hadn't said a word all evening. He just stared at the fire, his face illuminated by the orange glow. Every now and then, he would shift his gaze to one of us, but it wasn't the kind of look that felt reassuring. It was more like he was analyzing us, studying us. "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice quieter than usual. "There's something strange about this place. It feels like we're being watched." Her words sent a ripple through the group, and I could see the unease in everyone's eyes. Even Tom stopped laughing for a moment. "Don't be ridiculous," Ethan said, trying to brush it off. "We're just here to relax. There's nothing out here but trees." But Sarah's words had struck a chord with me. I'd been thinking the same thing. Ryan turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto Sarah. His eyes didn't have the warmth I remembered from our childhood. They were cold, calculating. I couldn't explain it, but in that moment I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You're right," Ryan said softly. "We're being watched." As the fire crackled, a sudden gust of wind swept through the camp, sending a few of the logs tumbling. We all jumped, but it wasn't just the wind that startled me. For a brief moment, just as the flames flickered out, I could have sworn I saw a figure in the distance, standing just beyond the tree line. It was too far away to make out clearly, but it was tall and seemed to move unnaturally, as though it wasn't quite right. I blinked, and it was gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "What?" Jamie asked, looking up from her phone, which she'd finally pulled out to check the time. "I thought I saw someone in the trees," I replied, my voice low. "Probably just an animal," she said, dismissing it with a laugh, but there was an edge to her voice. I could tell she didn't like the way the atmosphere had shifted either. Tom looked over at Ryan. "What about you, man? See anything?" Ryan didn't answer. He just stared into the darkness, his expression unreadable. "I think we should go to bed," Sarah said suddenly, breaking the silence. Jamie nodded, standing up. "Yeah, good idea. We'll get an early start tomorrow." Ryan stood too, though he didn't seem eager to leave the fire's warmth. "Do you think it'll come for us?" he asked, his voice soft and strange. "Come for us?" Tom echoed, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "What are you talking about, man?" Ryan didn't answer. He just kept staring at the darkness. As I lay in my tent that night, the sound of the wind outside was the only thing that kept me from spiraling into full-blown panic. But even that sound was different, distant, almost hollow, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I kept thinking about Ryan. Something was wrong with him. It wasn't just the way he had acted tonight. It was the way he had been acting for months now, whenever we all got together. He didn't seem like the same person I once knew. I heard something move outside the tent, just a rustle of leaves. I held my breath, waiting, but it was probably just an animal. Still, my heart pounded in my chest, and sleep refused to come. The next morning, the tension hadn't lifted. If anything, it was worse. Jamie tried to keep things moving, suggesting a hike to get everyone's mind off the unease, but I could tell no one was fully into it. Tom tried to joke his way through the hike, but his jokes seemed forced now. Even Sarah was quiet, her eyes darting around as if expecting something to leap out from behind the trees. Ryan, of course, was quiet again. More than usual. He barely spoke at all as we hiked deeper into the forest. The air felt thick, like something was watching us from the trees, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all just waiting for something. I don't know why I decided to wander off. Maybe it was the silence getting to me, or maybe it was just the need to escape the group. But I stepped off the trail, just for a minute, to take a breath away from the others. That's when I found it. Buried beneath some leaves was an old tattered journal. It was leather-bound, and the pages inside were yellowed with age. I picked it up, dusted it off, and opened the first page. It was written in a careful, precise hand, the words almost too neat to be real, but the deeper I read, the more the words began to twist into something darker. It was filled with descriptions, observations about us. Tom slammed on the gas and we sped off into the forest, the tires screeching as we tore down the narrow path. We didn't look back. I couldn't. The only thing that mattered was getting away. We made it. Somehow, we made it. We found service far enough down the road, and I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the campsite was empty. Ryan was gone, No trace of him. No evidence of what had happened. Nothing but the ashes of the fire we'd left behind. The police questioned us, but we didn't know what to tell them. How do you explain what we'd seen? How do you tell them about the man who was never really a man? The monster who had been walking among us for years. When they left, we drove back to the city in silence. I could feel the weight of the journal in my bag, but I didn't want to open it again. Not now, not ever. We were safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was still out there, waiting, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Because in the end, I realized something. He had always been in control. He had always been one step ahead of us. And now, I couldn't help but wonder, had we really escaped? Or had he just let us go?
I don't even know where to start with this. I guess I just need to get it out because it's been messing with my head for days. Maybe someone here can help me make sense of it. For context, I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment in a pretty old building, nothing fancy. It's the kind of place that hasn't been renovated in decades, but the rent is cheap, and I don't mind a little wear and tear. I've been here for a year now, and nothing weird has ever happened before this. No strange noises, no creepy neighbors, nothing. Just me, my apartment, and a pretty uneventful routine. That changed last week. I had the weekend off, so I figured I'd do a deep clean. You know, the kind where you move furniture, scrub everything down, all that. I don't do it as often as I should, so there was a lot of dust under things. I started in the bedroom. It's small, just my bed, a dresser, and a nightstand. I pushed the bed frame away from the wall to sweep underneath. The second I did, something caught my eye. A crumpled piece of paper. At first, I thought it was just trash that had slipped under there somehow. But when I picked it up, I realized it wasn't just a random scrap of paper. It was a drawing. A child's drawing. The paper was wrinkled and faded, like it had been there for a long time. It showed 4 stick figures, drawn in crayon. Just simple shapes, circles for heads, straight lines for bodies. But what made my stomach tighten was that one of the figures had a thick red X drawn over it. And under each figure there were names. 3 of them were hard to make out because the crayon had smudged over time, but one of them clear as day was my name. I just sat there for a second, staring at it, my mind racing through explanations. I don't have kids. I don't know any kids. So how the hell did a drawing with my name end up under my bed? I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe it was left by the last tenant. Maybe some kid had lived here before, and this was just some random thing they forgot. But that didn't sit right, because this apartment was completely empty when I moved in. I would have seen this before. And the part that really messed with me? The dust under my bed was thick, like undisturbed for months thick. But the paper, it wasn't dusty at all, almost like it hadn't been there long. I tried to forget about it. I threw the drawing in the trash and kept cleaning, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that night, I found myself digging through my lease agreement, trying to see if there was any info about the previous tenants. There wasn't, just standard paperwork. So I decided to ask the landlord. He's an older guy, late 60s maybe, and he doesn't talk much. Keeps to himself. I only ever see him when I drop off rent checks. I caught him the next morning when he was fixing a light in the hallway. "Hey, do you know who lived in my apartment before me?" He barely looked up. Couple of people over the years. "Any families? Kids?" That got his attention. He gave me this weird look. "Number not for a long time. Last guy was a single man. Before that, a woman, lived alone. Why?" I hesitated. "I just found something weird when I was cleaning." He shrugged. "Could have been here a long time. That place is old. Probably nothing." I could tell he wasn't interested in talking about it, so I didn't push. But it felt off. Something about his reaction. Like maybe he knew more than he was letting on. That night I had trouble sleeping. Not because of the drawing, at least. That's what I told myself, but because my brain wouldn't shut up. I kept replaying it in my mind. The way my name was written. The red X. At some point I must have drifted off because I woke up to a sound. A soft rustling, like paper moving. I turned over, still half asleep, and squinted into the dark. My room was quiet. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting a faint glow through the blinds. I listened. Nothing. I figured I was just hearing things and rolled over. Then a soft knock. Not on the door. On the floor. I froze. It was so faint, so soft, like someone tapping just beneath me. I held my breath, straining to hear more, but there was nothing, just silence. I must have stayed like that for 10 minutes, heart pounding, ears ringing from listening so hard. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just the building settling. Old places make weird noises, right? But as I tried to go back to sleep, one thought kept creeping back into my mind. The drawing. Had it really been there all along? Or had someone put it there? The next morning, I decided I needed to look around more. I started checking places I hadn't before. The back of drawers, inside cabinets, under furniture. And then in the kitchen, wedged behind the refrigerator, I found another drawing. My stomach dropped. It was the same 4 figures. Only this time, the red X was bigger. Like someone had gone over it again and again, pressing harder each time. And beneath the stick figures, there was something new. A word, written in shaky, uneven crayon. Soon. I felt sick. I needed to know who left these here. I grabbed my phone, pulled up the number for my landlord, and hit call. It rang once, twice. Then he declined the call. I stared at my screen. He didn't even let it go to voicemail. Something was wrong. I could feel it now. This wasn't just some old drawings from a previous tenant. This was deliberate, and I was part of it. That's where I am now. I don't know what to do next. I don't want to overreact, but my gut is telling me this isn't random. Someone left those drawings here. Someone knew my name. And whoever they are, they're still here. Somewhere. Watching. Waiting. I didn't go to work that day. I called in sick, though my boss barely acknowledged it before hanging up. Not surprising, I almost never call out. But I couldn't sit at my desk and pretend everything was normal, not after what I found. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at the second drawing. The red X was darker, angrier than before. The word soon was scrawled underneath in the kind of unsteady handwriting a child would use. But no children had lived here. I knew that now. And yet someone had left this. I wanted to believe it had been here the whole time, hidden behind the fridge, but I couldn't make that lie fit anymore. It didn't make sense. That meant someone had put it there recently. While I was in the apartment, while I was sleeping, I spent the next hour checking every corner of my place, going through everything. Closets, cabinets, behind furniture, every possible hiding place. And then, in the hallway outside my bedroom, I found the floorboard. It was barely noticeable, but when I stepped on it, it shifted just slightly, enough for me to feel the difference. I knelt down, ran my fingers along the edge, and found a tiny gap. My heart was hammering in my chest. I pressed my fingers into the gap and lifted. The board came loose. Beneath it a space, a small, empty compartment. But it hadn't always been empty. I could see the marks on the wood, faint lines where something had been dragged in and out over time. Something roughly the size of the papers I had found. Someone had been hiding them here, and taking them out when they wanted me to find them. I dropped the floorboard back into place and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. Someone was in my apartment. Not just once, repeatedly. I couldn't pretend otherwise. This wasn't some weird prank or a forgotten relic from a past tenant. Someone had been here, leaving messages for me, watching my reaction. And my landlord knew something. That much was obvious now. He had brushed me off too quickly, shut down my questions before I could push further. And then he ignored my call. Why? Because he knew exactly what I would find. Or worse, he knew who left it. I didn't even bother texting him this time. I threw on my jacket and walked straight out of my apartment, heading for the first floor. His unit was tucked in the corner near the building's front entrance. I had only been down here a few times to drop off rent, to ask about a maintenance request. He had never invited me in. I knocked, waited. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Footsteps. Then the door opened just a crack. The landlord peered out, expression unreadable. Something wrong? I clenched my jaw. Yeah, actually, I need to talk to you. He didn't move. About what? I held up the second drawing. His eyes flicked to it. No reaction. Then he sighed and opened the door fully. Come in. His apartment was smaller than mine, cluttered, dimly lit. The air smelled faintly of dust and something else, something stale, like old paper left in a damp room. He gestured to a chair near the kitchen table. Sit. I didn't. I held out the drawing. Tell me what this is. His expression didn't change. Looks like a kid's drawing. Yeah, and why is my name on it? That got a reaction. A flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, fear, passed through his eyes before he smoothed it over. I don't know. I didn't buy it. You said no kids have lived here. They haven't. Then who left this? Silence. He rubbed his hand over his face. Look, he muttered. This building is old. A lot of people have come and gone. Maybe one of them. I cut him off. I found a hidden compartment under my floor. His posture stiffened. Bingo. He tried to recover quickly, but it was too late. I pressed harder. I locked my door the second I got back inside, my hand gripping the deadbolt tighter than necessary. My mind was racing. The drawings weren't random. I wasn't the first person to find them. And the last tenant who did, they disappeared. That was all my landlord would give me before he shut down, before he all but told me to drop it and leave. I should have listened, but I couldn't. Because if I was next, if something was actually happening in this apartment, I needed to know what I was up against. I needed to know the truth. I sat on my bed, staring at the floorboard. I had put it back in place earlier, but now it felt like it was mocking me, like there was something beneath it I hadn't found yet. I grabbed the edge and lifted it again. The empty space stared back at me, just a gap of nothingness. But my gut told me there was more. I ran my fingers along the wood, pressing against the bottom panel. It felt solid at first until I hit a loose section. My breath caught. I pressed harder. The wood shifted beneath my hand, and I managed to wedge my fingers underneath the thin panel and pull it free. And that's when I saw it. A small book. I hesitated before picking it up. It was thin, worn down, the edges of the pages curled from time and dust. I flipped it open. Inside, more drawings. Page after page of childlike sketches, all done in crayon. But these weren't just stick figures anymore. These were detailed, messy, chaotic. And the first image? A tiny person, curled up in a dark space. A closet. Or a crawl space. Or a hiding spot. I turned the page. Another drawing. A tall figure standing outside the hiding place. A hand reaching inside. The next page, the small figure being dragged out, and below it a word. Number. I felt sick. These weren't just random sketches. These were memories. Someone had been hiding, and someone had found them. I kept flipping, my hands shaking now. Each image was worse than the last. A child crying in the corner of a room. A locked door. A figure standing in the doorway watching. Then, a drawing of 3 stick figures. 2 were big. 1 was small. The small one had a red X over it, just like the drawing I found under my bed. I swallowed, my mouth dry. I didn't want to turn the page. I did anyway. The last drawing was different. It wasn't crayon. It was written in shaky black ink. Just 5 words. I don't want to go. I slammed the book shut. I needed answers. Now, the landlord wasn't going to help me. But maybe someone else could. I grabbed my laptop and started digging. I searched for missing person reports connected to this building, to this area, anything. At first I found nothing. But then, an article from 10 years ago, a missing child case. A little girl named Lena Parker, 8 years old, last seen in this building. My breath hitched. I clicked on the article, scrolling through the details. She had lived here with her mother. One day, the mother left for work. When she came back, Lena was gone. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, just vanished. I scrolled down, my pulse pounding. The article mentioned the last person to see her, my landlord. My vision blurred for a second. I read the words over and over again, as if they would change. He had been the maintenance man at the time. He was the last person who saw Lena alive. He told police he had fixed a leaky pipe in their unit that morning, that he left and never saw her again. He was never charged. They never found her. She was never seen again. I sat back, my breathing shallow. The drawings, the floorboard, the missing girl, it all clicked into place. She had been hiding here, maybe from him, maybe from someone else. She had been trapped inside these walls, in this apartment, in a space no one knew existed. And now, years later, someone was reminding me. I heard it before I even closed my laptop. A faint scraping noise. It was coming from under the floor. My whole body went cold. I slowly stood up, staring at the spot where I had found the book. The scraping was soft, subtle, like something was being pushed against the wood. A piece of paper. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. I knelt down, lifted the floorboard one last time, and there it was. A new drawing. Fresh. The red crayon was still smudged, like it had been made just moments ago. I picked it up, my hand shaking. It was me, a stick figure standing in my bedroom. But this time, the red X was over my head, and beneath it, a message. He's coming. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there, staring at the new drawing in my hands. The red X was over my head this time, and beneath it, a message. He's coming. My chest felt tight. I wasn't stupid. I had been playing detective, digging into something I had no business knowing. And now whoever left these drawings, the same person who had been slipping them under the floor, hiding them in my apartment, watching me, was telling me I had gone too far. That it was too late. I needed to leave, now. But I didn't. Not yet. Because there was one more thing I had to do. I had to confront the landlord. He had lied. Not just a little, not just omitting the truth. He had outright deceived me. He had told me no kids had ever lived here. That was a lie. I had the proof right in front of me. A missing child. A hidden space inside the apartment. And the landlord, the last person to see her. I couldn't ignore the feeling clawing at my gut any longer. He knew something. Maybe he had been the one to leave the drawings. Maybe he was trying to scare me off before I uncovered the full truth. Or maybe he was the reason Lena Parker was never found. I didn't give myself time to overthink. I grabbed my phone, started recording audio, and headed straight for his unit. The hallway felt longer than usual. My pulse was hammering in my ears as I knocked on his door. Silence. I knocked again, louder. A slow shuffle from inside. Then the door creaked open, just enough for me to see one bloodshot eye staring back at me. What do you want? No pretense this time. No fake politeness. I held up the drawing. You tell me. His eyes flicked to the paper in my hand, but he didn't react. Not the way I expected. He didn't look surprised. Just tired. Like he had been waiting for this. Where did you find that? His voice was hoarse. Under the floorboards. My grip on the paper tightened, along with a book, and I found something else too. A news article about Lena Parker. His jaw tensed. You said no kids lived here. That was a lie. He exhaled through his nose. Go home. Number. I stepped forward. Tell me what happened. Tell me why someone keeps leaving these. His grip on the doorframe tightened. If you were smart, You'd stop looking. That's not an answer. I expected him to get angry, to slam the door in my face, but he didn't. Instead, he did something worse. He laughed, low and bitter. "You think you're the first?" he asked. I froze. His gaze drifted down the hall, almost like he was remembering something. "Every few years," he murmured, "someone like you moves in. Someone who starts digging." A sick feeling curled in my stomach. "And then?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes snapped back to mine. Then they disappear. I stepped back, my pulse slamming against my ribs. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. I tried again. "What happened to Lena?" He exhaled, shaking his head. "You don't want to know." I felt the weight of my phone in my pocket. The recording was still running. But I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what came next. Still, I had come too far to stop now. "Did you take her?" I asked. He flinched like I had hit him. "God, no." He ran a hand down his face. "I tried to help her." Silence stretched between us. And then, finally spoke. "She was hiding," he said, his voice quieter now. "I found her one night, maybe a week before she disappeared. She was curled up in the laundry room, shivering. I asked where her mother was, but she just kept saying, 'He's coming,' and..." A shiver ran through me. "Who?" I asked. He shook his head. "She never said. Just kept drawing pictures in the dust on the floor, over and over." He swallowed hard. "The same thing every time. 4 figures, 1 crossed out." My throat tightened. "Just like the drawing I found." She was terrified. His voice was distant now, like he was somewhere else. "I told her to go home, but she refused. Said she wasn't safe there, that he would find her." He rubbed his temples. "And then, one day, she was gone. Just like that." My voice came out hoarse. He nodded. "Her mother came home from work and Lena wasn't there. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry." I swallowed hard. "And you didn't tell the police about what she said, about the drawings?" "I did." His eyes darkened. "They didn't care. They said kids make things up, that maybe she ran away." I thought of the drawings hidden in my apartment, the notebook under the floorboards, the warning I had just received. "He's coming." I backed away. "You need to leave," the landlord said again. His voice wasn't threatening. It was pleading. "You don't understand," he continued. "Whoever did this, whoever took her, they never left." My stomach turned to ice. The words didn't make sense, but I felt the truth in them. I opened my mouth to ask more, but at that moment, a loud knock sounded from my apartment door. My blood ran cold. I turned my head slowly, my breath catching in my throat. I could see the dark outline of someone standing outside my door. The landlord's face drained of color. "Don't answer it." His voice was barely audible. The knocking came again, harder this time. My body refused to move. Then, a single sheet of paper slid under my door. A new drawing. I already knew what it would be. A single stick figure, standing alone, a red X over its head. And this time, there were no other figures left. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack a rib. The knock had stopped, but the paper was still there, half tucked under my door. The landlord was staring at it too, his face drained of color. His breathing had gone shallow, his hands shaking slightly at his sides. "Don't," he whispered, "just don't." But I had to, because I already knew what I would see. I stepped forward, my fingers stiff as I reached down and picked it up. A new drawing. Just one stick figure now, standing alone. No other figures beside it. A red X over its head. My head. And beneath it one word. Tonight. My stomach turned over. My pulse felt like static in my ears. "Pack a bag," the landlord said suddenly. "Get your keys, get your phone. You're leaving." My voice came out hoarse. "What?" He grabbed my arm, harder than I expected, and turned me to face him. "You don't have time." His voice was a low, urgent whisper. "Whoever's doing this, they're coming for you." I yanked my arm away, backing up. My head was spinning. None of this made sense. "I don't even know who they are," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes flicked to my door. His jaw was clenched so tight the veins in his neck stood out. "I don't either," he admitted. "I just know they don't stop. Not until you're gone." Something about the fear in his voice rattled me. This was real, and if I didn't leave now, I might not get the chance. I turned and walked straight back to my apartment. The hallway felt wrong, too quiet, like someone was listening, watching. I locked the door behind me and forced myself to think. I needed to go, now. But as I grabbed my bag and stuffed it with the bare essentials, wallet, phone, charger, shoes, jacket, my mind wouldn't stop replaying everything. The drawings, the hidden floorboard, the missing girl, the landlord's warnings, and the last person who lived here, the one who disappeared. Had they gotten the same drawing, the same warnings? Had they tried to leave too? I didn't want to know. I just wanted to get the hell out. I grabbed my bag and turned for the door, but I stopped. The air in the apartment had changed. I felt it before I heard it. A presence, a shift in the silence, and then the softest sound, a floorboard creaking. Inside the apartment, behind me, my breath hitched. I turned my head just slightly, enough to see. The closet door was open. Not much, just an inch, a thin black gap in the darkness. Someone was inside. I didn't wait. I grabbed the door handle, yanked it open, and ran. Down the hall, past the landlord's unit, out the front door of the building, into the night, my lungs burning, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't stop running until I was across the street, halfway down the block. Only then did I turn back. From where I stood, I could see my apartment window, dimly lit from the street lamp outside. And I swear to God, for a split second I saw a face in the glass. Not my reflection. Someone else. Watching me. Still. Unblinking. I left that night. Never went back. Never even tried to get my things. I broke my lease, ignored the landlord's calls, and crashed on a friend's couch for a while before finding another place. Somewhere far away. I tried to move on. Tried to tell myself it was just some sick game, some deranged prank by someone who had access to my apartment. But that doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain the drawings that got worse every time. It doesn't explain the person hiding in my walls. And it doesn't explain why it keeps happening. A month after I left, I checked the rental listings. My apartment was back up. Same price, same description. No mention of anything that happened. I scrolled down, looking at the photos, and then I saw something that made my skin crawl. A picture of the bedroom. It was empty now, my bed, my furniture, all of it gone. But on the wall, near the closet, I could see it. A single red crayon mark. A thick X. Like someone had started another drawing, waiting for the next tenant.
I wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories. Sure, I'd heard the rumors. The whispers about the Northwood dorms being haunted, about the missing student from 10 years ago, about the strange knocking sounds people claimed to hear late at night. But I figured every college had its share of urban legends. I had only been on campus for a month, settling into the routine of early classes, late-night study sessions, and cheap cafeteria food. My roommate, Daniel, was the opposite of me. Loud, outgoing, constantly surrounded by people. We got along well enough, though I often found myself retreating to the dorm when he went out partying. Northwood had an older, almost forgotten feel to it. The hallways were too quiet at night, the lights dimmer than they should have been, casting long, flickering shadows on the peeling walls. My dorm was on the 4th floor, one of the older wings that had barely been renovated. The room was small, the window overlooked the woods behind campus, and the radiator made strange ticking noises when the air got cold. It started with the door handle. One night, around 2 a.m., I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. The slow, deliberate turn of the knob. Not a rattle, not an accidental bump. Someone was trying to open the door. I sat up, my heart knocking against my ribs. "Daniel?" I called, but I knew he wasn't back yet. He had texted me an hour ago saying he was crashing at a friend's place. The knob stilled, but I could hear breathing on the other side. Soft, measured, waiting. I reached for my phone, but as soon as my fingers brushed the screen, the sound stopped. I waited, frozen, listening. Nothing. After what felt like hours, I convinced myself it was just someone drunk trying to find their room. It was a college dorm, after all. Stupid things happened. But then I noticed something. The peephole was covered. A shiver ran down my spine. I hadn't noticed before, but now that I looked, the tiny circle was completely blacked out, like something, or someone, was standing directly in front of it, watching. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Daniel came back, oblivious, hungover, laughing about something stupid his friends had done. I wanted to tell him, but somehow, saying it out loud made it too real. I convinced myself I was overreacting. Then, a few nights later, it happened again. This time I was awake, sitting at my desk, headphones in, drowning in an essay that was due the next morning. The air was heavy with the scent of burnt coffee and stale dorm room air when I heard it. Knob turning. I ripped my headphones off, my breath caught in my throat. I turned, staring at the door. It turned again, slow, testing. And then, from beneath the door, a shadow. Not just a shadow cast by the dim hallway lights. This one moved. It stretched, creeping inward as if something was pushing itself underneath the door, seeping like smoke into the room. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then a knock. 3 soft, deliberate taps. Not from the outside. From inside my closet. I sat there, frozen, my mind scrambling for an explanation. I told myself it was my imagination, that my exhaustion was playing tricks on me, that I had misheard where the sound had come from, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. The knock had been inside the closet. Slow, intentional. My skin prickled with cold sweat as I forced myself to turn my head toward the door. The shadow beneath it was gone. The doorknob was still. The hallway outside was silent. But my closet door, slightly ajar, just enough for darkness to seep out, felt like it was breathing. I stared at it, my pulse hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. My body screamed at me to run, but some part of me, the logical part, refused to move. This was a dorm. A normal dorm, in a normal college. There was no way someone had been inside my room. No way I hadn't noticed. And yet the air felt thick with something unseen. Something watching. I stood up, slow and deliberate, my chair making the faintest scrape against the floor. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. Movement, breathing, the shift of weight in the dark. Nothing. Just the distant hum of the vending machine down the hall. My fingers clenched into fists. I wasn't going to let paranoia win. This was my room, my space. I wasn't about to start jumping at shadows. I forced myself forward, one step at a time, until I was standing right in front of the closet. My own reflection stared back at me from the cheap mirror attached to the door, wide-eyed, pale. I lifted a hand, hesitated, then grabbed the handle and yanked it open. Nothing. Just the same cramped space filled with my jackets, a stack of shoeboxes, and the laundry I'd been too lazy to put away. My breath left me in a shaky exhale. Of course, there was nothing. There was never anything. I was exhausted, overworked, and psyching myself out over some stupid prank. I shut the closet, locked my dorm room for good measure, and forced myself to sleep. The next morning I woke up groggy, my limbs heavy with exhaustion. I went through my routine, barely thinking, my mind fogged over with the kind of fatigue that clings to you like a weight. I grabbed my bag and went to class, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. The campus was buzzing with its usual energy, people rushing to lectures, half-asleep students clutching coffee cups like lifelines, the distant sound of someone blasting music from their dorm window. It felt normal. But then I saw the bulletin board near the student center, a cluster of flyers pinned to the cork. My stomach twisted as my eyes landed on one in particular. Missing person. The photo was of a student, a guy around my age. Short brown hair, glasses, a familiar grin frozen in time. My brain struggled to place where I had seen him before, and then it clicked. His dorm was down the hall from mine. I didn't know him well, had only seen him in passing, but a cold chill ran through me as I read the details. Missing for 5 days. Last seen leaving the dorm late at night. No sign of forced entry in his room. No leads. A creeping unease settled into my stomach. 5 days ago, that was around the time I had started hearing the sounds at my door. When I had first noticed the peephole was covered, I swallowed hard, telling myself it was just a coincidence. Colleges had thousands of students. People disappeared all the time. Ran away, dropped out, left without telling anyone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't random, that it was connected. That night I double-locked my door. I shoved my desk chair under the handle, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. It made me feel stupid, but I didn't care. Sleep came in restless waves, every creak of the old building sending a spike of anxiety through me. At some point, deep into the night, I woke up to breathing. Not mine, not Daniel's, right outside my door. Slow, shallow, like someone standing just inches away, listening. I stayed completely still, my heart racing so violently I thought it might shake the bed frame. My phone was under my pillow and I barely dared to move as I reached for it, my fingers shaking as I turned on the screen. 12 a.m. A single notification glowed at the top. Motion detected at your door. I stared at it, my mouth dry. The security app linked to the dorm's hallway cameras had picked something up. My hands fumbled as I tapped it open, my breath caught in my throat. The screen flickered, the grainy camera footage loading. My dorm door was in frame, the dim hallway stretching out in both directions. For a moment, it showed nothing. Then, movement. Someone was standing right in front of my door. Not knocking, not trying the handle, just standing there. And then, they bent down. I watched paralyzed as the figures slowly lowered themselves until they were eye level with the keyhole. Watching. My stomach turned to ice. They knew I was awake, and they were waiting for me to move. A cold sensation spread through my chest, like my body knew something was deeply wrong before my mind could fully process it. I gripped my phone tighter, barely breathing as I watched the screen. The figure outside my door remained crouched, completely still, just inches away from the peephole. I couldn't make out their face, only a vague silhouette in the dim hallway light. They weren't knocking, they weren't moving, just waiting. A part of me wanted to call out, to ask who it was, to break the silence. But another, much stronger instinct screamed at me to stay quiet. Whoever they were, they didn't want to be seen. They wanted to watch. The realization sent a deep electric dread through my limbs. I stayed frozen, my thumb hovering over the emergency dial on my phone. If I called someone, would they hear? Would they try to get in? And then they reached up. Slowly, deliberately, their hand lifted toward the peephole. I watched through the grainy footage, my pulse hammering against my ribs, as their fingers pressed against the tiny glass circle. Covering it, the screen went black. I sucked in a sharp breath. They knew. They knew I was watching. For a long moment, nothing happened. The hallway camera remained dark, my dorm eerily silent except for the soft hum of the old radiator. I didn't move. My skin felt too tight, my body stiff with anticipation, waiting for the next sound, the next shift in the air. But it never came. After what felt like hours, I tapped the app again, refreshing the feed. When the camera flickered back to life, the hallway was empty, no sign of anyone. The peephole was clear. But something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been outside wasn't gone, that they were still nearby, listening. The air in my dorm suddenly felt heavier, the walls closing in, the silence too sharp. I had to check. I had to know. Heart pounding, I slipped out of bed and moved toward the door as quietly as I could, my bare feet making no sound against the cold floor. My hands were damp with sweat as I reached for the knob, pressing my ear against the wood, straining to hear anything beyond it. I inhaled deeply, bracing myself. Then, I yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. Just the dull hum of the exit sign at the far end, the distant murmur of someone's TV behind a closed door. Nothing unusual. Except for one thing. A small, folded piece of paper lay on the ground right outside my room. I stared at it, my skin crawling with unease. It hadn't been there before. Slowly, I crouched and picked it up, unfolding it with trembling fingers. There was only one sentence scrawled across the page in uneven handwriting. "I like watching you sleep." A wave of nausea rolled through me. My fingers gripped the paper so tightly it crumpled in my palm. Someone had been inside the dorm building, standing at my door, watching me. Maybe for days. I slammed the door shut, locked it, then shoved my desk chair under the handle again. My breaths were coming too fast, my mind racing through every possibility. Every time I had dismissed the strange noises, the shifts in the air, the creeping sense of being watched. This wasn't in my head, it wasn't some prank. Someone was fixated on me. And they were getting closer. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the building, every whisper of the wind against the window made my skin prickle with paranoia. I kept the dorm lights on, my back pressed against the wall, watching the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. But nothing happened. No more knocks, no more notes. Just an unbearable silence stretching through the early hours of the morning. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to move. My limbs ached from tension, my thoughts clouded with exhaustion, but I couldn't stay here any longer. I needed to do something. By the time I made it to campus security, my hands were still shaking. I showed them the note, explained the knocking, the covered peephole, the motion alert from my phone. The officer behind the desk listened with a concerned expression, nodding as I spoke. But when I finished, his response made my stomach twist. "We'll look into it," he said. "But there's not much we can do unless an actual crime was committed." I felt my breath catch. "What do you mean?" "Someone was outside my room in the middle of the night. They left this." I held up the crumpled paper, but he only sighed. Look, dorms have hundreds of students. Pranks happen all the time. And unless we have footage of someone breaking in, it's not really a police matter." I stared at him, my pulse drumming in my ears. "So that's it? You're just going to ignore this?" "We'll increase patrols in your building," he offered. "If anything else happens, let us know." I wanted to scream. Instead, I grabbed the note and walked out. For the rest of the day, I tried to go about things normally, but everything felt off. I couldn't focus in class. I kept scanning the lecture hall, searching for any familiar face from the footage. Was it someone I knew? Had they been watching me all along? When I returned to my dorm that evening, my hands were slick with sweat as I unlocked the door. I braced myself for something, another note, a new sign that they'd been back. But the room was exactly as I had left it. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. I sat on the bed, my mind churning. The feeling of being watched hadn't left me. If anything, it was worse, stronger. And then my phone buzzed. A new motion alert. I swallowed hard, my fingers hesitating before tapping the notification. The camera feed loaded, flickering slightly, and when it cleared, I stopped breathing. The hallway was empty, but the door to my dorm was slightly open. My entire body locked up. I had locked it. I was sure I had locked it. A single realization took hold, icy and paralyzing. They weren't outside anymore. They were already inside. I didn't move, didn't blink. My breath barely passed my lips as my gaze flicked toward the closet door. Just like before, it was slightly ajar. The air in the room felt suffocating, pressing down on me from all angles. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, my hands barely able to keep steady. 901, what's your emergency? I opened my mouth to speak, but before a sound could leave my throat, the closet door creaked open. The line went dead. The next thing I remember is running. Sprinting down the hall, pushing past anyone in my way, my only thought getting out. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air under the cold glow of the streetlights. The police arrived within minutes. They searched my dorm, questioned my neighbors, even checked security footage. But in the end, they found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no figure on the cameras, no fingerprints but my own. They suggested I might have imagined it, that I had left my door unlocked and the wind had pushed it open, but I knew better. I didn't go back. That same night, I packed my things and stayed with a friend off campus. The next morning, I put in a request for a room transfer. A week later, I moved to another dorm in a different building. For a while, nothing happened. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I was safe now. But sometimes, late at night, I would wake up with the same suffocating feeling. The sensation that someone was there, just beyond my line of sight, standing in the shadows, waiting. And a few weeks later, when I was scrolling through my phone, trying to clear out my old notifications, I saw it. An unread message. No name, no number. Just a single text sent the night I fled my dorm. You were right to run.